Everybody, welcome back. Richard Farley here. We're actually on the floor of the draft room as it's being prepared here at the Key Bank Club at Providence Park. And somebody that's in Fort Lauderdale right now between drafts, NWSL all-around expert Lori Lindsey. Lori, I wanted to ask you from the outside, when you look at what the Thorns might need when it comes to the draft on Saturday, what comes to mind?
Yeah, I think really, and I think this is across the board for a lot of the teams as well, outside the expansion teams, is depth. And in particular, depth in the midfield and then depth up top. When you look at losing Kristen Westphal and even Amira Ali last night in the expansion draft, and then you see some shifting, or even if you're looking towards this summer's play, you're going to lose some people to World Cup qualifying. So the depth of the midfield in particular, when you look at Angela Salem, you look at Rodiku Rodriguez, Sinclair could be gone. Those are some areas, centrally in particular, Lindsey Horan, Crystal Dunn being pregnant, that you're going to have to fill a void. And then obviously up top with Lucy and Charlie being gone to Angel City. Those are the areas, those players played some big moments, scored some big goals when necessary. So center mid, up top, goal scorer.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the names that the Thorns had to basically give up to ensure their core stayed protected in expansion. Simone Charlie, Tyler Lucy, part of maybe the deepest forward core in the league. And then yesterday, Kristen Westphal and Amira Ali. From your point of view, what does that leave as far as the depth of the Thorns roster? One of the deeper teams in the league last year. How much of that depth do you think, well, let me rephrase that. How much do you think depth is still a strength as we enter Saturday's draft?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was thinking about that coming into our conversation here, because when you look at last year for the Thorns, that's really what kept or made them such a significant contender in the playoffs and in the later parts of the year. When we started then to see the Thorns start to dwindle a little bit in terms of the performances, but in the middle of the year, you saw players like Hubley step up. Again, we talked about Charlie and Lucy coming up. Lucy was injured, I know that, but Rocky Rodriguez, Angela Salem leading the way. So some players that really stepped up for the Thorns, contributed and allowed for them to get the points needed. And then it didn't really matter about the performances later on in terms of points to get into the playoffs. But, that is a tough question now, because I think, again, when you start to think about what it's going to look like in terms of World Cup qualifying, do you have those numbers? And with Sinclair, even Angela Salem, these players starting to get a little bit older, this NWSL season is a grind. I think there's going to be a little bit, I wouldn't call it rebuilding, but you're going to have to find some pieces of those like hidden gems, maybe some grinders that can come in and not necessarily make an impact, but can play some minutes and significant minutes or important minutes off the bench.
Lori, I love this because you're already changing my view on this draft a little bit, because with the Thorns, I've gotten so used to their roster being pretty set that Mark Parsons, Rich Gunny, they like to maybe take a project like a Simone Charlie and develop them, take the long view, although Simone wasn't drafted. Tomorrow, they may need to have some pieces that can step in for all the World Cup qualifying that goes on, all of the absences that happens with the international team, which leads me to just a general question. From your point of view, and I know you're going to get asked this in so many ways on the broadcast tomorrow, the gap between college and pros at this point in time, particularly as the league is expanding by two teams, how difficult is that going to be to navigate for somebody that maybe is taken 13th overall, where the Thorns sit right now?
Yeah, well, the gap is significant. And I think that gap is actually increasing in some ways. And why I say some ways is because, I think as these teams become more solidified and the league becomes more mature, it's more difficult for these young players in college to come in and really have an impact right away. I mean, yes, we had the Trinity Rodman, blew it out of the water. Probably the best goal scorer and striker in the league last year, being just a rookie. Emily Fox, the number 1 pick as well. But then you look at somebody, Brianna Pinto, came in a little bit late, number 3 pick for Gotham, and barely played. So it really depends on the fit for the individual player and the team. And I think that'll be interesting to see what Rhian Wilkinson can do coming in as a new coach and her style of play, tactically, what that looks like. So it does depend. And another example I use is Anna Helferty for Washington Spirit. 3rd round draft pick, local for Washington, but was a significant piece for them, played outside back initially at the beginning of the year when they had some thin numbers on the back line, and then was one of their first subs off the bench, coming in as more of an attacker, a winger, all the way into the championship. So again, it just depends. And I think Portland in particular coming into this draft could be sitting in a really interesting position because you have a lot of pieces already throughout your starting 11. And I sometimes think early on it's those grinders or the players that don't get picked to the third round because they have some of those non-negotiables that our teams are looking for that fit in more significantly right away than even some of the first round picks, because some of those first round picks are players that you're picking for their special qualities. And that might not shine through until 1 or 2 years into the league. Whereas those players are going to be bruisers that are going to come off the bench, maybe just get stuck in the tackles that you need to close out games. And that's really, when I look at Thorns, that's what they need coming into the season.
Lori Lindsey, we're going to be doing another hit with you that we can share with our fans during the draft on Saturday. So why don't we pick this back up in 10 seconds and present now? Thank you for joining us.